Good morning. All right, it's on. Good morning. Good morning, EO Nashville. How are we doing today here at the Virgin Hotel? Everybody, good morning. Everybody's very excited to be here this morning, I can tell. All right, let's get this rolling. Once again, welcome, and like I say, welcome to the Virgin Hotel, and I'm very excited to have ITR Economics in here with us today. But before we get to that, a few announcements. If you have not registered yet for the annual holiday party, please do so. Much like this event, which we are almost near capacity, the EO holiday party is limited to 125 spots. And with 250 plus members, plus spouses and significant others, 260. Thank you, Marty, for the up. That's right, we added 15. We added 15 new members recently. So grab your spots because it will fill up fast. And let's see here. There's probably some more information about it. We're going to be at the City Winery December 5th. And it's going to be an evening of wine tasting, dinner, a live concert. Do we know who's playing yet? And you'll have the ability to choose your seat. Okay, and once again, you'll have the opportunity to decide who you want to sit with so you can keep your social distance in play for your personal needs. Tables of 2, tables of 4, and tables of 6. So once again, you'll be able to kind of adjust your seating arrangements to fit your personal needs. All right, so come January, now 2021, everything's going to magically get better, I hope. And come 2021, we're going to start getting into some more training, some more EO learning. And we're going to bring in a guy named Rob Lime. He's an EO member from Indianapolis, and he's going to come in on January 21st, and we're going to talk about sales. Because if you have enough sales, then you're probably lying to yourself. And if, like I say, we could all use more sales. So he's going to come in and talk about virtual selling, how to continue to build relationships, because people still buy from people they like and trust, and how do we make that happen in a world where maybe you don't get to go out and see people face to face. Then February 9th, put this one on your calendar. Chester Santos, he's the International Man of Memory, and he will be an event with spouses at Top Golf. So are we going to hit golf balls too? Yeah, we get to hit golf balls too. So you're going to get to hit golf balls and learn how to improve your memory. Let's see. He's also influenced EO members like Mike Faith. Is Mike here today, by the way? No? Okay. Mike Faith, once again, he's a 3-time competed in the World 2014 Memorization Championship, and he uses these techniques every day to situations to memorize names, facts, figures, and much more. Because if you're like me and you meet somebody and then 5 minutes later you can't remember their name, that's kind of embarrassing. So come here, listen to what he's got to share, and you'll be a better memory. Anyway. All right. Let's see here. So we could not have such fantastic opportunities without the support and awesome strategic alliance partners. And so they've done so much in so many ways, especially the past months, the PPP, the other opportunities about investments and things that we've had presentations from our strategic alliance partners for. So a quick round of applause for our strategic alliance partners. And if you're a strategic alliance partner, thank you very much for being here. All right, so, and I want to thank everybody that's joining us virtually, by the way. So, hey, everybody virtually, good morning. Thanks for being here. And let's get to it here. So, out of respect for those that are here in our organization, please wear a mask and remain 6 feet apart during the event. Your mask should be on at all times, especially if you are standing, unless you are eating and drinking. So, please take care of one another and follow those basic rules. All right, so please welcome Lauren Baker, an exceptional speaker and economist with ITR Economics. She is here to help us determine the best course of action for us and our businesses. Lauren graduated cum laude with honors in economics and a double major in religion from Wesley College. She has a stellar reputation for an attention to detail and an ability to understand the needs of each of her clients. Prepare to leave informed, and thank you, Lauren, for being here. And I had the pleasure of having a cocktail at the pool bar with her last night, and I think we're all in for a real treat. So everybody welcome Lauren.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here. To be perfectly honest, I do a lot of events like this typically. This is my first one since March, so it's the first time I've been on a plane. I am so excited to be here. I've been just itching to get back out of my house. So thank you all for joining me. And thank you, Mose, for that great introduction. Now, I was going to start by telling you a little bit about myself, about ITR, but I realized that's not the point. That's not why we're here today. Really, I'm here to show you the data because there is a very clear story in the economy right now, and the data is what is going to tell us where we are and where we go next. So really, I'm just the messenger. So I hope to give you today that data-driven, unbiased view of where we are, where we go from here. But I do want to start with a little bit about ITR, our firm. So we are a forecasting firm. I'll show you a lot of those forecasts today, but if you take one thing away from this presentation, maybe it's not even where the economy is or our forecast, but I want you to be able to use the data yourself. So I'll show you a lot of it. I will explain what I see in these trends, but I hope you can kind of go beyond that, and I want to give you the tools today to be able to do that yourself. So whatever I'm looking at, be it gross domestic product or maybe retail sales in a certain sector, maybe it's just your own individual company sales, I'm always starting with that data. I like to look at it on a monthly basis, so that's what I'm showing you here, some sample data set. Sorry, I'll move that box if it gets in the way. So I'm looking month by month. Maybe these are my own company. Let's call this Lauren Incorporated. Here's my sales data. I can do a few different things to manipulate this data. It's not high-level math, pretty simple calculations, to really show me what's going on here behind the numbers. So the first thing I'll do is I'll take my most recent month, and I'm going to compare it to the year-ago level. So September 2020 compared to September 2019, and I can see how much bigger or smaller am I than I was 1 year ago. I call this a 1/12 rate of change. The 1 stands for 1 month of data, over 12 months ago. How much bigger am I in this last month? But let's not stop there, because right, in normal times, 1 month of data, that could be meaningless. There could be one big project that came out this month, or maybe something got pushed from September into October, so September looks really bad. So I don't want to focus too much on the noise, right, the volatility in my data set. So let's smooth it out a little. I have a 3-month moving total, a quarterly total of activity. And just like I calculated that 1/12 rate of change, I'll do the same exact thing. Take my rolling 3-month moving total, and I'll calculate a 3/12 rate of change. So now this is a little smoother. I can see a quarterly activity. I can see, in this case, obviously things are not great right now for this business, down 3% from the same quarter last year. This does a few things. It doesn't just tell us where we are. It also takes out that seasonality, right? I'm always comparing a busy season to the same busy season last year, slow season to slow season. But let's take it one step further. Let's do that same exact analysis on an annual basis. So here I have a 12-month moving total. I'll abbreviate it 12 MMT. And just the same calculation, plug that into Excel, and I can compare my 12/12 rate of change. Now I'm going to come back to this metric more often than anything else through the rest of the presentation. So I want to be sure everyone's really understanding what we're getting at here. I'm looking at my trailing 12-month total compared to last year. Right now, down 4.4%. That's probably a pretty mild contraction, right? Only 4% down from last year. Some of us would be very happy with that number. But it's not just the annual. Things are changing so quickly in the world today, so quickly in the economy, that I don't just want to look at that annual figure. It's going to lag a little bit, right? I need to get a lot of new months of data after a change, after a shock to the system. So if we look at everything that we just calculated, there are a lot of numbers up here. This is a very busy slide, but once you understand exactly what we're looking at, you can start to pick out what matters. So if this is my company again, I look at my 12/12 rate of change down 4%, and it still is declining. That's very bad. In fact, we at ITR, we take that 12/12 rate of change and we plot it across this sinusoidal wave. That represents the 12/12. It might be positive, it might be negative, maybe it's rising, maybe it's falling, but it will always be in one of these 4 phases of our business cycle. So that last example I showed you, this company is in what we call phase D, or recession trend, where that 12/12 is negative and it still is declining. Things are getting worse and worse. I want to know that because I want to make very different decisions. If I, Lauren Incorporated, am in phase D versus, let's say, phase B, where growth is accelerating. But it's not just that immediate 12/12 rate of change. So I'll go back to these numbers. And if I look back historically, look at the 3/12. It looks like the most negative number came back in, what is that, May or June. That was when we had our low point. And then, even though this is still negative, down 3%, it's starting to rise again. The 1/12, it's even more clear. That number, in fact, is positive 1% in September. So I'm getting a strong signal that my most recent data is starting to turn back up. So maybe that's a sign to me that I'm close to that low point where we crossed from the red phase back into the blue phase. So things will start to recover in the future. We're not there quite yet, but that's a signal as to not just where we are, but what comes next. So I would encourage you, run this calculation for your business. I'm curious, does anyone have a strong idea of where you stand right now? Do you know where your business is in this business cycle? Because even if you're down, maybe you're starting to enter that phase A recovery trend. So I hope you do go home, and those of you on the line, I hope you're still paying attention and not just running an Excel formula, because this is your own data. You have this information, and you can use it. I'm going to show an example. How do you use your own internal data? No forecast. I've done no assumptions or forecasting yet, but this can tell you where the low is coming. So again, a hypothetical company A. I'm showing many different metrics, so the slide's a little busy here, but you can clearly see the bottom set of lines where it says raw, that's just their monthly sales figure, and the 12-month moving total, that's the teal line. So you can see there are some ups, there are some downs. Obviously in '08, we see the Great Recession, they had a contraction. Looks like they had another little one here in 2015-16, and now here they are with the pandemic-induced recession. So things are down just a bit, but where is that low? Look at the top two lines. That's the rate of change signature, both a 1/12 and a 12/12 kind of smoothed out. They've got some bad news, right? There's negative, they're down 4.4% from last year, but look to the lows. That 1/12 has already reached the low, and in fact, checking point number 2, it has upward past the 12/12. That's their positive signal. If this is my company, I'm starting to get excited. Maybe I'm investing because I want to hit the ground running once we get that 12/12 turning back up. That's my signal that I need all systems set to go, that I need to really, really be ready to get out ahead of the competition, not still living in the past in that recession mindset. So this is one example. They've hit those first 2 checking points. We're waiting on number 3 when that 12/12 hits a low. For them, I would expect it comes this quarter, if not next quarter. Very imminent here, looking for that low point. Hopefully everyone's still with me. I will pause. Is this making sense? Any questions on the calculations? It's not high-level math. I really encourage you, go back this afternoon, give it to the intern. They're good for numbers like this. They can do the Excel crunching. But there's one more really critical component. This is only looking at one data set, your own data, or maybe your own sector of the economy, right? It's important to know, is your sector growing while your company isn't? That's a critical component that we should be talking about. But we can also use economic data to look at what comes next. So again, no forecasting. I'm only using hard evidence. And the blue line, that's the 12/12 rate of change for the company that I'm interested in. So we can see here they are in phase D recession, below the 0 line. But where does the low happen? The green line is going to give us a hint. So this is our ITR leading indicator. We calculate this every month. But we have about 10,000 different indicators in our database. So maybe I could look at retail sales. Maybe I could look at capacity utilization. There are a million different things that we can see are, first of all, highly correlated, right? So these 2 lines tend to decline together. They tend to rise together. But not just that, we have a little timing mismatch. Let's look from peak to peak, from trough to trough. The lines just don't quite line up perfectly. So I'll calculate, in this case, there's an average 10-month gap between the directional movements in each of these lines. So what I'll do is I'll hold my blue line steady, and I'm just going to shift that green line straight across my x-axis by 10 months. Now I've moved it 10 months into the future. We can see the peaks align much better, the troughs align. Not every cycle's perfect, but in general, we see a much closer correlation. And even more importantly, I haven't done any forecasting yet, but I have an idea of what the next 10 months hold. I can see when this indicator made its low point. Timing-wise, maybe I don't have a full magnitude of decline. We see that the peaks aren't always the same height. But timing-wise, I know when I should expect, generally, for my own rate of change to turn that corner, to start picking back up. So we'll do this analysis with a bunch of different leading indicators today, and hopefully that will give you a sense, not just my opinion of when the economy will turn up, but that I do have hard evidence that there are already indicators turning up, that we shouldn't be here in this phase D recession mindset. That's in the past. We are almost through the worst of it. And my forecast is for the low point to come early 2021. So first quarter of 2021, that's when we hit that low. And by that point, I want you all looking ahead, because that is where you can make the most gains. Get out ahead of it. Get out ahead of that growth cycle. Obviously, we do a lot more than that at ITR. We do some forecasting, so I will show you a lot of those forecasts, and I'm going to give you the evidence. This is not just, like I said, my opinion or my firm's opinion. This is really the data that we're here to bring to you. Was that a question? Yeah. Yep. Yep, so the question is, for those who can't hear virtually, on the troughs, is it an external factor skewing the data? And the three that you pointed out were the pandemic more recently, the 2008 recession, the Great Recession, and you pointed out 9/11, I believe. That was actually, there wasn't a recession in early kind of 2000s, the early 2000s. That was caused by the dot-com bubble bursting. So we would consider that not really a 9/11 effect. It was kind of pre-existing at that point. So I would consider that just the regular, normal business cycle recession of the early 2000s. So you're absolutely right that, and that's why I include news and market observations as a critical component of what we do, because we're looking not just at that normal business cycle, but what are the other factors? Right now, the pandemic is a huge factor that's influencing all of these trends. It kind of knocked us off of our normal pre-existing course, and we refer to it as the black swan event because it came from so far outside the world of economics. Something like the '08 recession, even the dot-com bubble, there were fundamental economic reasons for those recessions. The one that we're in now, this is global health. This is not economics. So it hit us, kind of blindsided us, right? Coming from so far outside of our typical leading indicators. I'm not a doctor. I don't have any medical, training or ideas of pandemics. So that's why we're still kind of reacting in a different way. That's why we see, and yeah, this is a great example. We had been in actually a technical recession in the industrial economy before COVID struck. And you see, this is just a sample data set, but you can see that green line, our ITR leading indicator. It actually had been showing the normal business cycle decline ever since that peak came in late 2018. So decline here, it was slightly below the zero line, and it started to pick back up. That was our sign of when that recovery, the next accelerating growth trend comes through. And you see just how sharply March hit, and we saw that real quick elbow down. You're going to see that pattern in a lot of the data I show you. That's because COVID was not economic-based. That said, this analysis still works. We still have a 10-month lead time. We still have that forward-looking view from this internal data, and things will normalize. So in 2021, we'll recover, we'll correct, and essentially we'll get back on that kind of pre-existing business cycle wave. Thanks for that question. All right, so I want to move ahead to what the forecasts are. This is probably what you're here for now that we've done that groundwork of the math and kind of the boring stuff. Obviously, the pandemic is the elephant in the room. Again, it blindsided us. No one saw this coming. There are no fundamental economic reasons for the recession. It's all due to those closures, to the pandemic effects itself. So we're watching it very closely. This map, unfortunately, is getting more and more red every time I update it. I don't like to see that because it's quite concerning from a human point of view. But as I explained to the folks at dinner last night, I'm an economist, so I'm not allowed to be a human. I'm just a robot here to show you data. I have no emotions. So as terrible as this sounds to say, I'm not worried about this chart. I'm not worried about the health outcomes, even the death rates, very concerning for a different set of reasons, but I will leave that for another speaker to have emotion. What I'm worried about from a purely economic point of view is the closures. Our country is slowly but surely reopening. We never thought it would be a perfectly smooth process. We thought there would be bumps in the road. But generally, we do expect gradual, more and more opening. We've seen some reversals in certain states. We've seen just maybe some pausing in others. But this is what I'm worried about. If a lot of this map goes back to orange, to reversing the closures, to re-closing down, that's going to be a major downside risk. I would say, expect a little day-to-day movement. Maybe there are capacity limits in place, right? Maybe you have to distance still. But if our country re-locks down to the level that we were in April, when we just weren't going out of the house, we were all really, really isolating and sheltering in place, you should probably expect some new forecasts coming out of ITR. This, to be fully transparent, is the biggest downside risk that I have for you today. But if that doesn't happen, if we do generally keep reopening the path that we've been on, the good news is we're really due for that low point, and we're seeing the evidence already. So the world is going to start to heal in 2021. The blue line on this chart, that's my 12-12 rate of change for the global industrial economy. So again, you see that deep V-shaped recession in '08. That was the Great Recession, a global recession. Ever since then, though, this line has been positive. So our growth rate has been positive, maybe a little quicker sometimes, maybe a little slower at others, but we've had a decade of really good, strong global economic growth until COVID hit. And here you see, we were actually in a slowing growth pattern, so that 12-12 was ticking down. Wasn't due to dip below the zero line, though. You see that elbow when COVID really struck the world. And the red line on this chart, that's my leading indicator. That's what's giving me hope going forward. So this is our G7, or Group of 7 Nations, leading indicator, and here I've shifted this forward 9 months. So that's why the endpoints of the data don't line up, even though they did occur in the same month. I'm showing you 9 months in the future, so 3/4 of outlook. Here we've seen that low. We're very clearly on the rebound. That line is rising again. That tells us it won't be a couple more quarters before we get that low for the global industrial economy. And we have many more leading indicators. That was just one example. If I'm tracking various countries, they've all turned to rise now. Doesn't mean their economies are expanding quite yet, but just that leading input is showing that rise will come soon. Here in the US, it's a very similar story. We are actually the largest economy still, so we're a large portion of driving that global train. In fact, we make up about 1/4 of global output on a GDP basis. Here I'm just showing the industrial side of the economy, but again, we are essentially one of the largest, the largest, and really one of the primary factors behind that global index. So again, we have the bottom set of lines shows the actual size of our US industrial economy. The top set of lines, that's showing my rates of change. The gray line is our quarterly growth rate. Teal line is the annual growth rate. And so yes, we are in a recession. That is negative, but look at my forecast points. We don't have much more decline to come. We are essentially at the bottom. The good news is, here I've seen, and again, let's think back to the rate of change analysis, right? That 3/12, it's made a low. It's now starting to rise. We are just close to seeing those two lines cross. When the quarterly growth rate rises above the annual, in the next quarter, expect that low point to come. This is the strongest signal that I can tell you to watch for. And I get this data you see from the Federal Reserve Board. That's what FRB stands for at the bottom of the slide. This is freely available. Check when that growth rate crosses. When the 3/12 crosses above the 12/12, that's my confirming evidence. I expect to see it really in the next month or two, but I don't have that data quite yet. So positive inputs from the rates of change, positive rise from even that quarterly activity level, that is giving me the confidence that we will see that growth picture come back. Now, I say that with a caveat, right? We will see growth again, and whenever I'm comparing that 12/12, I'm just comparing to 1 year ago. So we will get the recovery in 2021. We will have growth, absolutely, compared to the year-ago level in 2022, but be aware that there will take some time to climb back out of this hole. If you see that 12-month moving average, the bottom teal line, it dropped pretty sharply during COVID, during the pandemic. We are down significantly from where we were. So if we think about a full recovery or a complete recovery, by that I mean the point at which we aren't just starting to recover, but we've actually risen back above that high water mark. So the size of our industrial economy has passed that pre-recession peak. We don't think that happens until the first half of 2023. That's still a few years away. That's the time at which we are not just making up the ground we've lost, but we're actually into an outright growth picture. So keep in mind, certain sectors will feel this for a lot longer. The airline industry, for example, or oil and gas, they were hit very, very hard. They will take more time to come back fully. I'll talk about the consumer in just a moment, but consumer spending is going to be one of the things really supporting this recovery. So if you are selling B2C, that is probably one of the best areas right now. You'll have the most robust and really immediate recovery back to that full economic recovery level. So something to keep in mind, and I'll talk to various full recovery metrics throughout the presentation. Now, the reason behind this, I told you we have strong evidence. That's not just our guess. We have the leading indicator evidence. Here's just a utilization rate. Essentially, this is a measure of the existing capacity in the US industrial economy, how much of it is being used. So, right, we had shutdowns with COVID. That caused a sharp decline in this line. But now it's starting to recover. It is showing those gains coming back. People are firing back up and getting back online. That's the good news. I've shifted this forward about 2 quarters, 6 months in this case, and it's very clearly compelling. The low point, that nadir, is really, really close. In this case, maybe even the risk is a little sooner than our overall ITR forecast. Maybe this is an upside risk for that recovery to be just a bit quicker to come back. So good news here, I hope, not just from this one. This is a dashboard that we like to follow. I would certainly encourage you to follow anything on this list. We find that these dozen indicators have the most compelling leading indicator relationship to the industrial economy. And as of September, the last one flipped to rise, so we are very clearly seeing all signs point to go. Our economy should be firing back on all cylinders here, again, around year end with the lead time that we have to adjust these for. Now, I said I'd talk about the consumer. This is one of the most interesting parts of this recession, and I think this gets to your question as to why is this case different? This is in no way a normal business cycle recession. We haven't seen anything like this in the US, really in the world before. Part of the reason is the consumer. So the graph I'm showing you here is just the raw dollar value, trillions of dollars of personal disposable income. It's a pretty steady number, right? We all tend to earn about the same amount until we get a shock. And you see that shock came in March, but maybe not as you would have expected. So March is this bar that drops just very slightly down before we get April. And we see incomes actually spiked in April. Maybe not surprising when you consider those $1,200 checks all went out in April, so that was a big reason behind this surge. But very interesting is that that trend continued. We actually had elevated levels of personal disposable income throughout the summer. My most recent data point is in September. So $1,200 checks, those didn't repeat. And in fact, by August and September, even those $600 additional weekly unemployment checks, those weren't going out anymore. So our incomes actually are still elevated compared to that previous high that we saw in February. People are, believe it or not, earning more money now. A lot of this was due to extraordinary government support. I won't ignore that fact, but this didn't just mitigate the decline. That help from the federal government, it didn't just make up some losses, it actually put us into an outright gaining position. That's critical here. Because not only were people earning more, but they just couldn't go out and spend it, right? In April, when we all got those checks, you couldn't get on a plane. You couldn't go out to eat to spend it. You really had a very limited subset of ways that even if you wanted to spend that money, that you could do so. So online shopping shot up maybe, or these other kind of things you could do from home. Maybe home repairs, that really saw a lot of gains. We're all stuck in our houses, we're seeing the thing we've been meaning to do for years, and maybe we finally get around to doing it, but a lot of that additional money was forced into savings. So our just pure billions of dollars in our pockets, our actual savings in this country, spiked like we have never seen before in the history of this data. Level is still elevated. It came down just a bit, obviously, but still elevated well above historic levels. So our consumers are sitting on a cushion, and they're sitting on a lot of pent-up demand. They have that money in their pockets. It can be spent. That is going to be one of the primary factors supporting the robustness of this recovery. Now, I'll talk about GDP. I'll show you some additional charts in a moment, but this is the rate of change for GDP. That's the blue line on this chart. And you see how closely it typically correlates with disposable income. This shouldn't be a surprise. 2/3 of GDP is driven by consumer spending. So there should be a very close logical relationship between these two lines. And we see that historically until COVID. And look at the two just completely diverge. They're starting to come back, right, but in different directions. So we do expect them to come back together, but that spike in the green line, especially once you consider the savings impact, that is really a strong sign for GDP. That's what's supporting us here in the near term. And in fact, if we look at GDP, we've already turned the corner. I have just quarterly data, so again, keep in mind, the quarterly moves a little quicker. It's a little more responsive than if we average things out on an annual basis. No joke, that we saw COVID really sharp decline in the second quarter. We see that huge gap, kind of that missing bar in the data. But look what happened in the third quarter. We came back, we made up so much of those losses, not quite above water yet, so it will take us more time to crawl out of that hole, like I said, to really get above the high water mark, but we are well on our way. We've made up a lot of those losses already, and the gains, essentially we are already in that recovery on a GDP basis. So again, consumer focused, 2/3 of this is consumer spending. That is a good place to be right now. Oh, and on the business side, this is another chart that really surprised me the first time I saw it. We hear about all those restaurants closing and retail shops going out of business and department stores, whatever it might be. We're hearing about a lot of business closures, but the data doesn't back that up. We are seeing, the business bankruptcy rate well below the 10-year average, certainly lower than we have been even in recent history. So the data isn't quite there yet to support the full-scale closures narrative that is easy to hear. Now, keep in mind, a lot of this is driven by things like the PPP program. There has been a lot of extraordinary government support that's keeping these businesses going for the moment, and there will be unintended consequences to that. So not saying we're totally out of the woods, just that the data doesn't show a really concerning level of bankruptcies quite yet. We'll be watching for that going forward, but I'm more concerned with the other side of that ledger. Not when does that support pulled back, what do the businesses do? Most will be out of the woods by then, but what do we do as a government, right? A ton of money has been pumped into the economy by our federal government, and that equates to additional borrowing, right? Deficit spending, taking on additional debt. Very, appalling level of debt per capita rise. The federal debt is really a concern for us at ITR. And so when we see this accelerating trend, really a spike during COVID, but this line has been on the upswing for many decades. And that comes into probably the most dour news that I have to deliver today. So I locked the doors. You're all stuck here. I apologize to you on the phones. You're the only ones that can get away. But we actually at ITR have a forecast in place for another Great Depression. And yes, I'm saying depression with a D, not just a normal business cycle recession. This will be something like the 1930s. This is going to be the doozy. This is not due to COVID. I want to be very clear. We've had this forecast in place for more than 10 years now, and our timing really hasn't changed. We expect this depression to come sometime around the year 2030. Maybe the additional level of spending we've seen this year might pull it in a couple years, but really that timing is based on more than just the debt. It's based on a lot of demographic trends. I'll talk about those in a minute, but really the critical driver here, the critical component for us to consider is what issues will the government tackle and what will they just not touch with a 10-foot pole? And unfortunately, spending is one of those that just we aren't getting any traction. We've known this is a problem for quite a while, and we just aren't having movement to correct the issue. So this chart, let's start from the bottom. Maybe that makes a little more sense. We'll start soft. That green line is interest payments on the national debt. By all measures, this is the most quickly rising major government expenditure. By the mid-2020s, the nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office expects payments on the debt to surpass our entire Department of Defense budget, which is quite large. So this is not going down anytime soon, partially because we're borrowing more, partially because interest rates are so historically low. It's been kind of muting that effect, that we could borrow, we could take on more and more debt and not pay very high interest rates. Interest rates just can't go much lower than they are right now. They really only have one direction to go, and that is up. So those two factors, more debt, higher interest rates, will be driving increased interest payments. And I hate to say that this is something like $500 billion right now, which just sounds like such a huge number until you see the rest of this chart. That green line looks fine. It's not, but it's the most reasonable thing that I'm showing you here. Let's see, the orange line, consumption expenditures, again, rising. That's a little bit more discretionary. The red line at the top that absolutely shot up, transfer payments, just absolutely out of control. Every time I remake this chart, I have to change the axis because that red line keeps bumping off the top of my screen. So just an unbelievable amount of money. I can't even fathom this dollar total. And if we add up those three lines, just those three segments of government spending, compare them to the blue line, which is tax receipts, we're not even close. We're not anywhere close to covering our spending with the money that we have coming in from taxes. So that's a problem. It's been a problem for a while. It's a bigger problem now than it's ever been. And so that's really a critical factor behind this depression forecast. So healthcare costs, Medicare, Medicaid spending, entitlement spending, Social Security is a critical component of this as we have that aging population. But really, most of it comes down to demographics. Even those categories of spending, of Medicare, of Social Security payments, part of it is due to the demographic boom that we have in this country. As the boomers are retiring, as they're aging, we think that 2030 is the time that we reach that pinch point because we have these demographic issues essentially pre-existing. Now, we aren't the only ones in the US. We are not the only country that will be facing these problems around that time. In fact, much of Europe is actually much older than the United States. Germany has worse demographics than we do. Even Brazil, I was shocked to see. We think of Latin America and South America as vibrant, young countries, but Brazil is actually, on average, older than the US. And if you're familiar with Asia, you probably know that Japan is just the worst profile in the world. In fact, I think it was 2 years ago, for the first time in Japan, they sold more adult diapers than they sold baby diapers across the country. I don't know a better metric of a demographic crisis than selling more adult diapers, but so they'll all hit this wall before we do, but we are absolutely in it as well. 2030, again, is that pinch point. We just can't kick the can down the road anymore. So we're going to face those problems, and we think that it will result in another Great Depression, not just in the US, but globally. This will be a big spillover. There will not be many safe harbors in the world. So I'm showing you not a forecast. I do want to be very clear. This is the 1920s through 1930s. So it's an analog, right? We can kind of see how did the last Great Depression go. Not a perfect model, but kind of an idea of what might be in store for our future. We think there's going to be more similarities than there will be differences going forward. So here we are in the 20s. Everyone talks about the roaring 20s, right? And they say there were no recessions. That was a pure decade of growth. Well, there were actually 3 recessions. So the fact that we started the 2020s with a recession really might not be that bad. We at ITR still think that the 2020s are going to be another roaring 20s. And I don't just mean that in the economic growth sense, although in this case, that will be part of it, right? Even though there might be a couple recessions, a couple bumps in the road, we expect this coming decade to be one of growth. There will be a ton of opportunities, general economic growth, right? Every peak a little higher than the last, every trough a little higher than the last, but also a lot of technology. We saw that in the 1920s. We are certainly seeing that now. Social movements, just general growth, general moving forward. So look ahead to the next decade as your opportunity. That's when you can be making those great gains, really, taking everything that you can through this decade of growth, because by 2030, unfortunately, we think we're in for a very similar scale, let's say, of depression. Looking at this chart again, this is just the industrial economy. The Great Depression wiped out that entire decade of gains, took us back to that previous low point, maybe even a little lower on this chart. But the good news is when I talk about the last Great Depression, a lot of people tell me, well, that was a 10-year-long experience, right? That was just 10 years of contraction, of negative growth. But actually, looking at this chart, by 1932, 33, that's when we hit the low point and started to recover again. So the economy was already on a recovery trajectory before World War II. That's one of the most common things I hear. It was World War II that got us out of the Depression. The data very clearly shows that we were already on that recovery rising trend. This is similar to our expectation in 2030. By the mid-30s, we'll see those green shoots, and we'll see those new opportunities. It won't be the same sectors that went down coming into this. There will be new technologies, things I can't even fathom right now. And there will be those opportunities. So look ahead, look to the new technologies. By, let's say, 2034 or 2035, that's when we should clearly get our feet under us and start rising again. But in the meantime, right, how do you ride this wave down? There are many things you can do. I have to admit, I'm looking around this room, and I see some folks, and they're doing the math, and they say, how old will I be in 2030? What golf course will I be playing? Because I'm going to have sold my business, I will be out of this, and it doesn't matter to me. And if that's the case, I absolutely congratulate you. Sell your business in 2028. Sell it to someone you don't like. Sell it for cash. Be done with it. Have fun playing golf. But if you're someone like me who might be in your prime earning years in the 2030s, or I hate to tell you, if you have kids who might be in their prime earning years in the 2030s, they are coming and knocking on your door. So you can't avoid this altogether. So my advice to you is be responsible now. Be aware that, again, this is just our forecast at ITR. It's been in place for 10 years. I have no evidence against it. In fact, for the past 10 years, we've only had stronger and more compelling evidence for this event to take place. But even if it doesn't, all I'm telling you now is be a little bit more financially disciplined. Maybe pay down some debt throughout the 20s. Be on strong financial footing. I don't think that's bad advice, good or bad. Even if this doesn't happen, just be a little bit more secure, because if it does, you'll be very glad that you did. So tell the kids to pivot to the opportunities. There will be growth sectors. There will be some, safe havens, let's say. Even during the Great Depression of the 1900s, we think of the breadlines and that everyone was unemployed. Unemployment spiked to something like 25%, which is terrible. That's obviously very scary, but again, I have to put on my robot economist point of view. That means that 3 out of every 4 people were still working. So this is not a full-scale, screeching halt shutdown, but it is really the most major depression that we've seen for the past 100 years. So I'm happy to take more questions about this. We've actually put a book out about it. Yeah, if it's okay, I'd like to take the questions now, if you guys don't mind. And so that way we won't lose the train of thought. So I will repeat it for those on the phone or do you guys have microphones? Perfect. Maybe, actually, I'm sorry, we'll start over here where the microphone is.
What do you think the risk of the government debt causing hyperinflation?
Yeah, hyperinflation is a real concern. We think inflation is likely to rise during the 2020s. I don't think hyperinflation is the most likely outcome. Obviously, there are a lot of ways that we can get out of this government debt picture. One of them is monetizing the debt. I think there will be bigger knock-on effects if we do that than just, we wash our hands of this debt, we paid it off, we're done, we're good now. We're going to have some serious credit issues if we do that. So hyperinflation could be a concern. I would say not the one item keeping me up at night when I look at this whole scenario.
We have a question on virtual. Can you explain transfer payments a little bit more?
Transfer payments, yes. Let me flip back. Sorry. Have to get through the animation. Yep. So current transfer payments, that is the Social Security, that is the Medicare, Medicaid spending. These are the, I guess I'd call them less discretionary, more, we are written in law that we pay this much, so we don't have the what should the budget be or shouldn't it be for this payment. Obviously, I believe the $1,200 checks were included in that red line. That's why it spikes so aggressively. The unemployment federal support was included, so that's why we see this line shoot up so aggressively due to the pandemic. Thank you for that question on the line.
Question. So your firm does great work, and thank you for being here.
Oh, thank you.
I think I remember your bosses in 2008 laying out the Great Depression scenario, and it was going to happen in 2009. Do I remember that correctly?
You're very close. So in 2000, I believe it was 6 or 7, we did put out a forecast for a recession in 08-09. Our timing was pretty close. I don't think we had the full magnitude exactly right, but we were one of the firms that did call for the Great Recession. We've never said that was the Great Depression. We've always said 2030. Okay. I know we might have said 2028, 2032, where we're not exactly locked in on the time frame. So much could happen.
I was searching for some comfort, so.
No, so it wasn't 08, and it wasn't this one, I have to say.
Understood.
This is a normal.
So I agree with the direction of the economy. I want to go back to the duration of this advance. Our advances have been going on for 10 years now rather than 4 years. Are you predicting that the next economic recovery cycle is a 10-year cycle?
No, thank you for that question. I should have brought this up when I had the industrial production slide up. So I believe I said it was the first half of 2023 is when we get that full recovery for the industrial economy. Obviously, it took a lot longer in the Great Depression, but again, this is a different scale this year. If we look back to 2008, which is the last real recession that we saw, it was, I believe, 7 years to get back to that full recovery picture. So this time will be much quicker. I know 3-4 years doesn't sound quick to anyone, but it won't be 7, it won't be 10. It will be much more. Oh, the next recession after this. Thank you. So after the current climb back out of this hole, we get back above water in 2022, 2023. At that point, we will see another slowing growth trend. At this point, we don't have evidence for that to be a recession, but there will be, I'll call it the backside of the business cycle. So we won't be at that accelerating pace of growth beyond 2023. That's when we kind of realign with those normal economic swings. Think of the pendulum, right, swinging back and swinging forth. The next recession, probably looking around 2025 at this point, but we haven't finalized that forecast quite yet. Thank you. Yes?
So what lines point to 2030 as kind of, the significant negative event? What coincides that makes, 29, 20, 30, 31?
Yeah, the timing for
the timing,
2030,
yeah.
it's demographics. It's all it's the aging profile of the U.S. When do the boomers kind of hit that break even, not even retirement age, but the Social Security, the healthcare spending. We consume something like 90% of all of our healthcare costs in the final months of life. That's just culturally how we do in America and most of the world, but especially here in America. So as we get that number of people aging and reaching end-of-life stage, those costs are just absolutely astronomical. So the major driver, more than anything else behind this forecast that feeds into the deficit, feeds into the debt, feeds into inflation, is all the demographic profile. Thank you. One in the back, yes.
I know your crystal ball is probably a little out of whack. Does everyone's? What do you see happening with the Fed return, with the Fed rates? And we had someone that was saying, "Oh no, we're going to keep it low for 4 or 5 years, 20 years, whatever." That's obviously non-realistic. What's your forecast?
Yeah, forecast for the Fed rate. We only put out a very near-term interest rate forecast. Beyond that, just so much moves and changes. I would expect rates to remain low in the very near term. The Fed has proven that they're taking kind of a new stance on inflation than they had in the past. So we're watching to see exactly how that conversation plays out. I will say the Federal Reserve has become much more political than it's been historically. So a lot of these decisions, maybe they're making slightly differently than they would have historically, but also really not showing much ability to get inflation back above that preferred band. So I would expect rates to stay low, at least here in the near term. By that I mean the next year. That's as far out as our outlook goes. Beyond that, again, like I've said before, rates can't get much lower. We're pretty much, there's not much daylight between us and zero. So the next substantial move will have to be upward, but I think it's a few years before we get there. Yes, from the
Yeah, we have another question online from George. What's the name of the book that you just referenced?
Oh, yes. So the book that Alan and Brian Bolio, who are the president and CEO of ITR Economics, it's called Prosperity in the Age of Decline. And it actually came out several years ago, but it's about this Great Depression event. And unfortunately, as you read it, there's a lot of kind of that eerie, when you read a forecast that was 5 years old, but a lot of those things are still true or even more true. So I know they're working on a new book I believe it's due to come out in 2021, but don't quote me on that. But if you do want to read the fundamentals of this Great Depression scenario, as well as what you can do about it, which I've started to outline here, but there's much more detail in the book. It is Prosperity in the Age of Decline. Thank you. Yes.
Hi, thank you for
Hi.
the information. My question is, if there is another shutdown in the next 6 months due to the pandemic, how does this change your projections?
If there's another shutdown, and again, by shutdown, I mean full scale, the world is back to where we were in April, that's going to push out the recovery. We might even see kind of that double dip, bottom. I don't think it will be quite so low. We've really learned how to adjust. And in fact, most of the outlooks that we've put in place at ITR over the summer, data's come in on the upper end of our outlook. So we as Americans, we're very creative. We found ways to work around these problems. So I think we've put those fundamentals in place. I don't think the low will be quite so low anymore, but timing-wise, it will stretch into the future. So if we all lock back down like we were in April, and again, this is not my base case, I have to believe that none of us are going back home anymore. Like, I just don't think the governors have the willingness or even are sure they have the ability to do such. But it would stretch that recovery out. So instead of a 1Q21 low point, maybe we push that into mid-year. It would really depend on just what form that shutdown takes. Yes?
Hi, Cullen
Hi.
Douglas. 2 questions. One,
Please.
did you follow at all Harry Dent and his stuff about the demographics, and he got it wrong?
I'm not
a while
familiar with
back?
that one,
Okay.
no.
Well, it's interesting. And the real question is, in the 2023, when we climb out, the demographics are still really bad.
Yep.
How do we climb out? What is your forecast on what occurs to the slope to start going upwards?
Absolutely. So the demographics really aren't the problem, and maybe I'll go back to this. Oh, there it is. Again, this is not our forecast for the 2020s, but it is a good analog for maybe there's a steeper recession here, maybe we get a smaller one in the mid-20s. This is a not unlikely outcome. And that's just due to normal business cycle movements. Every time we contract, we'll start to grow again, we'll contract again. I mean, that pendulum, it swings back and it swings forth. COVID was a shock. That knocked us off the existing course, but we will normalize, and things will kind of get back on that pre-existing trajectory. Demographics just won't pinch quite yet. We're, pushing, like I said, kicking the can down the road, pushing that problem further into the future. 2030 is the point that it just breaks. We can't, extend it out. Thank you. Yes?
We have another question online from
Awesome.
David. Speaking of creativity, what, if anything, could prevent the next depression you're forecasting?
Oh,
A
dear.
medical breakthrough, unlimited free
Yep.
energy, what?
All right, so if we have that, magic wand that we can wave, the first thing I want is for politicians to address those entitlement spending. So things like Social Security, like Medicare, Medicaid spending. I don't believe that's a realistic possibility, but that would be a great first step. Even medical, I know medical technology, medical breakthroughs is one of the suggestions there. And that could be good for, let's say, extending life, making people, healthier for longer, able to work for longer. But at what cost would that come? Usually new medical technologies, new medical breakthroughs are so expensive, that's not helping us on the spending side. In fact, that if anything, I would expect, unless we have just that magic pill that doesn't cost money, I would expect that only makes the problem worse from the spending point of view. So unless the politicians are doing something about this debt, I would say it would take a lot more, really, that magic wand waved. Previously we had this, and I don't like to say this, I think I'm too young, but some of the, Brian and Alan, if you meet them, are older gentlemen, and some of the other speakers that you'll hear from RTR, they say, all we have to do is start a war, but only with the old people. And so that fixes our whole demographic profile. We're gonna march from Florida right up the East Coast, and they have this whole battle plan scenario. It's fantastic. I don't think I can quite get away, so I apologize for that. But fixing the demographics, again, with that magic wand, that would be one way that we could get around this. So again, I don't think we're starting an old people war, but hypothetically, fixing the demographic crunch would be one move in the right direction. Please.
In the analysis that you opened with regards to comparing this to our own businesses, the quarter-over-quarter and year-over-year analysis, is there a way to include anticipated seasonality in that analysis?
Yes, seasonality in that analysis. So if you think about how we're doing that math, right? Obviously, the monthly, there's a lot of seasonality. Even that 3-month moving total, there's some seasonality. Maybe you're busy in the summer and dead in the winter. But once you take the 12-month moving total, well, you have one of every month, so there's no seasonality there. But even more critically, the reason I really love that rate of change analysis is because you're always comparing the same time to the same month, 3 months, whatever it is, 1 year ago. So even if I'm just looking at my 3/12, my quarterly growth rate, I'm comparing busy season to busy season. I'm comparing slow season to slow season. So maybe it will tell me how much busier is this busy season than last busy season, but you're not getting the normal seasonality. It just mathematically strips that out of the analysis. So it actually is built for any business, seasonal or not. The only real issue would be, if you get maybe one major project a year and it could fall any month of the year, that's going to be a problem. You will see that noise still in the data. But otherwise, that seasonality is stripped out. You're good to go with the rate of change analysis. Thank you for that question. Let's take one more, and then I do have more good news. So one more for this break.
Yeah, I was curious if there's anywhere in the world that has kind of had an instructive example of how to deal with demographics. So you mentioned Japan, and that's one I always think of as, it's been in bad shape for a long time. Is there anything they've done that we can, sort of learn from? Or I know they've been kind of muddling through for 35 years anyway. Is that?
Yeah, so Japan is definitely an instructive case. In some cases, what not to do. They've made some strides. I know they're using a lot of robotics where they can't find work. And so, I would say on a more micro level, there are great lessons coming out of Japan, if only because they faced the demographic crisis for much longer than we have. But for maybe a good example of a country, and I don't mean this purely from a demographic profile, but just from the all-encompassing kind of total of it, let's look north to Canada. Their budget is much more in line. Their government spending, if I go back to this chart, it looks a lot better. Their blue line is the highest on this when I do this analysis for Canada. So still not perfect, but much, much better. And a very similar country, right, demographically and culturally to the US. And so that is a good example of some fiscal responsibility. So I will say as a kind of cushion, right, where do you park some money if you're worried about, about this happening? Canada, Australia, and Switzerland, their government debt is very stable, very secure. We expect those to be 3 relative islands of strength around 2030. Canada is personally my favorite because I think there are just so many similarities, so many good trends. But the 3, if you are looking for those kind of opportunities to maybe mitigate the decline, Canada, Switzerland, Australia are our top 3 picks. Thanks for that question. So I will move forward. We do have some good news. I like to tuck that Great Depression in because everyone's really depressed after it, and this way, hopefully, I can make a few more friends before we wrap up here for today. So I will take more questions at the end. Happy to talk about that. Happy to talk about anything else. But I do want to note the industry drivers that we're facing. So again, it's a very odd time in the world. We are essentially at that inflection point. We're at that low. And so the question is, where do we turn? How do we get back up? And like I mentioned before, this will not be symmetrical across the whole economy. Different sectors are going to react very differently come 2021 and even further out into the future. So I mentioned the consumer, some of that relative strength. I wanted to talk about retail sales. This is one sector, I mean, you look at that 312 again, the top gray line, hit so hard. We saw it absolutely plummet really to close to the same level as the Great Recession in 2008, but not for as long. So the difference between now and 2008 is just the duration. Think back to 2007, 2008. It felt like every time you turned on the TV, month after month, quarter after quarter, there was just more and more bad news piling on. Things got worse and worse and worse. Now, yes, we had very bad news, but it was really just a couple months, right? We had one immediate downside shock, and look at that 312. It's a nice sharp bend right back up, nice sharp trip back up into recovery, and even more importantly, think back to our rate of change analysis, right? The relationship, that 312 is above the 1212, it is rising. That is a positive signal. So even though we did, yes, cross that 0 line, we are in for recovery here. Retail sales should be relatively robust here in the near term. So one spot of good news. And we can look across different sectors within that retail space. Obviously, department stores hit really the hardest during the recession, still showing a lot of negativity, but looked at discount stores, even the overall total. This is weekly data. I mentioned we're looking for really close, quickly occurring data to start to see those inflection points, start to see the pick back up. And I have some positive numbers here. So that is really encouraging on a weekly basis to start to see that recovery very clearly manifesting in the data. This is another great measure of demand. Just looking at that truck freight level, here we have an index, excuse me, and we're back above water in this case. So seeing that shipment, thanks to online retailers are really making the greatest gains right now because we're stuck at home. We have to order on the computer, but that measure of overall demand, this is really strong. So we're back above that pre-recession 100 level is kind of the break even, the pre-pandemic. We're back up above water. This is good news, and this shows that our levels are only increasing. That demand picture is still improving. So again, no forecast here. This is actual data, a hard evidence that does show that upward trend. So some good news, I hope, for you. Total manufacturing production. I just want to touch on the manufacturing economy. One of the things that just makes me cringe the most when I do these talks is when someone says, well, US manufacturing's dead, right? It's all been shipped overseas. It's all been outsourced to Asia, Mexico, wherever else. That is not true. Pre-pandemic, again, here's our 12-month moving average, the teal line on the bottom of this chart. Pre-recession, that peak was actually close to historic levels. We really do a lot of manufacturing in this country. COVID knocks that off course, but again, look at that rate of change signature, 312, just essentially at the level of the 1212 right now. That tells us in the next quarter or two, we're due for that recovery. We think this will be a strong recovery in 2021. Again, maybe not getting back to those full high watermark levels until 2023, but that's nothing like we saw in the almost decade that it took to get close to those pre-2008 levels. And there are maybe different sectors that will be more of a trend in this, but one of the biggest things that we saw even before COVID was near sourcing. So manufacturing, sure, if you're a textile company, you really should be in Asia. The costs are so much lower. I don't expect the US is competitive on that front. But for a lot of our general manufacturing sectors, we had been saying pre-pandemic that the 2020s were the decade of the Americas, especially North America. It makes a lot of sense. We are the world's largest consumer base. So to have that production close to where you want it, to end up, maybe we're not exactly reshoring quite to where that production left, but near sourcing, close to that end-use market. Maybe that means Canada, maybe that means Mexico. They'll be big beneficiaries of this trend, but overall in the US, we think that that trend is coming back. It's really reversing. We're seeing not just more nationalism and kind of reshoring, but manufacturing will be one of the critical components. Currently, we're seeing a huge trend in the semiconductor space. A lot of that production is moving back out of Asia. It's moving to the west coast of the US. And I don't just mean the software, I mean the physical hardware. So that's maybe one of the forerunners. But look ahead from there. There will be other sectors, especially high tech, especially things like the chemical industry, really have a lot of opportunities here. The pandemic showed us the weak spots in the global supply chain, right? Maybe you couldn't get product, or even if you could, you were worried that something would break down in Asia and you wouldn't get the materials that you needed into the US. That's causing a lot of companies to just look at their supply chain, maybe make some backup plans, and much of that will take place right here in America. So look beyond your typical customers. Maybe you have some new opportunities, one of your customers trying to bring that production closer, just to know where it is, just to know that you can get these supplies, that you can get these raw materials coming in. I really do encourage you to take advantage of this trend. We're again, seeing the hard evidence. This is not just a forecast anymore. And COVID, if anything, accelerated the existing trend. I'll pivot now. That's a little bit about manufacturing. Just in the interest of time, I'm going to move on to construction. Obviously, all markets are local markets. I was floored by the number of cranes that I saw downtown when I came to Nashville. Just what a huge, growing city, very appealing destination. We're seeing these trends really across the Southeast especially. The Sun Belt's really an attractive place right now for people to move. But nationally, good news for construction. So if we look at residential construction, this space doesn't move quite with the rest of the economy. So my typical business cycle trends for the US housing sector are moving about 12 months ahead of the overall industrial economy. So right now, obviously some dislocations. You couldn't get workers on site during the pandemic. There were shutdowns, but that has all normalized now. In fact, if we look, again, that 12-month moving total, just millions of houses started in the past 12 months. COVID is barely even a blip. This was really just continuing on at its pace. Rate of change, you see the signature in that 312. A lot of work was paused, but it's coming back now, 16.7%. That might be the highest number that I show you today on a 312 basis. There are great opportunities. Again, that 312 above the 1212 still rising, 1212 at 8.1%. Nationally, there are great opportunities. This is just looking at that single unit housing space. But we're seeing something similar with multis. So if you're in the construction industry, especially in such a high demand area as this, that is good news. I'm very optimistic for you for 2021. And again, that's not just my opinion. We have the hard evidence. We have those leading indicators. So blue line on this chart is a market index from the Home Builders Housing Association. That market index, 19.4%. What a great signal of future growth. Again, you see the pandemic, right? We can see that disruption in the data. But the fact that we've bounced back, we're almost back to where we were, that's showing us that the worst is over in this sector. Mortgage rates are absolutely supporting this trend, right? We talked about how low interest rates are. That's not just true for governments and for businesses. That's true for individuals. And so we have, I think in this case, about a year of lead time looking at the mortgage rate kind of impetus to be buying houses. great signal, really going to support this market going forward. And it's not just the new construction. If you are in the maybe contractor space, if you're looking at, like I mentioned earlier, the renovations, we see just a huge demand for home improvements, for renovations, additions, alterations. Here I'm showing you existing home sales and, again, market-based, but we're seeing a lot of movement due to the pandemic. Maybe I realized I don't want to be in a city anymore because I was locked down in my little apartment, so I'm going to go buy a house in the suburbs. Up north where I am, we've seen that trend to a huge extent. But overall, just a lot of movement. That is a positive signal. Once you're in that new house, you're going to make it yours. So really, really strong signal for that remodeling sector as well. So let's look at the people. Obviously, people moving city to suburb, state to state, wherever they are, that's important for the consumer side of the economy, but it's also critical for the hiring side. So businesses looking to hire, that's been one of the most prevalent concerns, at least pre-pandemic, that I had been facing. So a lot of our clients that we work with one-on-one saying, I just can't hire qualified talent. Well, we saw the unemployment rate shoot up during the pandemic. Here I'm showing that orange line is just employment, so the number of people in jobs. And it really did plummet. We lost probably close to a decade of the upward trajectory of those gains on this chart. But it still remains a challenge depending on where you are. There are certain skill sets that there just are not enough people to do. So even though we had a historically high unemployment rate, that doesn't necessarily translate to more available workers. And in fact, we're already starting to see that employment number start to recover. Typically in normal times, employment lags the overall economy by about 9 months. This is not a leading indicator as many people would like for it to be. So keep that in mind. The timing shift here is actually a 3/4 lag behind GDP. Overall, though, both of these lines starting to correct, starting to normalize as well. And I think this chart, looking at the unemployment rate, it really illustrates just what an unusual recession this was. This is not a normal trend. We talked about it on the income side, but the unemployment rate shows this very clearly as well. We have a much more aggressive reabsorption rate into the labor force than we do historically. Maybe part of that's due to the fact that these folks were just furloughed. They knew they'd get back eventually, right, once the business reopened. Once their restaurant opened, they could go back to their waitstaff job, whatever it was. And absolutely, abysmal, really shocking, eye-popping numbers back in the late spring, early summer. But now our unemployment rate's down to 6.6%. This is much more normal. And the pace of that decline really does illustrate this is not a normal business cycle. Again, coming in from left field, not from the world of economics. So that's why this is not that same picture as we saw in 2008. That said, there will be more people out there, so I hope if you are trying to hire, you're having some traction, some ability to find folks. I would really look for that talent. Look at your own team, though. Maybe you have some A players and you have some B or C players. This could be a period of natural attrition for those other folks. Look for the highly qualified talent. Look for those top people. It's very likely that there are more of them out there than there were, let's say, in February, pre-pandemic, when things were really tight. Look at the almost full employment as I look at it on this chart. So I hope this was a little pressure release valve, but keeping in mind that each individual experience, it depends on your industry, it depends on your sector. It might not necessarily be reflected in these numbers. So I do want to leave plenty of time for questions, so I'm going to wrap up here with our roadmap. So where do we go? Obviously, we're in recession now, but that's essentially over. 2020 is in the books. 2020 is gone. 2021 is going to be our recovery trend, and we will see growth after that. Keep in mind, this is not a straight line, ride off into the sunset, accelerating growth trend forever. We will see the next regular business cycle occurrence as these trends kind of realign. So I pointed out 2022 is maybe when we tip into that slowing growth, probably 2023 backside of the business cycle. Be aware that is coming. This is a growth decade in general. Don't be caught off guard if there are a couple bumps in the road. I wanted to show you, again, in full transparency, the knowns and the known unknowns. This is our stakes in the ground. So what do we really need to see to be confident in the forecast that I just gave you? At this point, we are absolutely on track for all of these things to remain true. Governors, federal governments, global governments not shutting us back down. I have a couple very specific indicators that we're following. I also note 5 of the leading indicators are green on the dashboard. When I showed you that, all 12 of them were green, so it would really take a lot to get down below 5 of those as green by the end of November. So all signs point to go, but if you want to track this, I absolutely encourage you, use these stakes in the ground. Call us up if more than a couple of these change. Again, I don't expect them to, but if they do, you'll have the visibility. So the real question is, how does this affect you? I hope I've given you a lot of good information today. I hope I've given you some tools to look at the data to see the real trend, not just a forecast, a guess, but the tools to look at hard evidence with an unbiased point of view. But this is where the rubber meets the road. So I would encourage you, do the math, know where your business is, know where your sector is, where the overall economy is, and know what you can do differently going forward. So I'm happy to have those conversations. I love having them with my clients because every business is so different that you want to know, how can we pivot specifically, get out ahead of the competition. But know more than anything else which fundamentals will prevail and what's just noise. You might note I didn't talk much about the election because I just don't think that matters hugely. We at ITR, we've run the numbers on Republicans versus Democrats, on divided houses, if the Senate's controlled by a different party than the president. We just don't find that there is a consistent, significant difference in growth rates. I think the GDP growth under a Democratic administration was 2.85%, under a Republican was 2.83%. Those numbers are so close. Those are indistinguishable. So I'm not changing any forecast based on the election. We just don't have the evidence that there's a consistent, data-driven reason to do so. Now, obviously, if you're an aluminum producer, you might care about tariffs. You might care about a much more specific sector, micro level. But from a GDP basis, our economy's too big for that. We have like a $19 trillion economy right now. It is the biggest in the world. It makes up 1/4 of global output. That's bigger than any one person, even if that person is sitting in the Oval Office. So I hope you take a little bit of confidence that these were our forecasts before the election. These are still our forecasts after the election. We are just so big. The pendulum has so much momentum behind it that it's really swinging despite the political noise. So I encourage you, red or blue, don't focus on that. Focus on you. Focus on your business specifically. And obviously, if there are regulations that affect you, that would matter. But big picture, keep in mind that we are moving full steam ahead into this next trend, this next phase. There will be a lag between the time that any individual policy takes effect and when it actually feeds through to the economy, to when we see a real impact on growth. We find that lag is about 18 months. So 2020 is over. 2021 is essentially in the books. The nearest term that any tax differences or any policy, any regulation would affect us is at least a couple years out. And I hope at least, that most of you are focused on the near term, on what you can do today for your business. So I'll end that comment with a quote from Warren Buffett. He said, "Red or blue, I can still make green. That's what I wish for you." I mentioned a lot of trends today, a lot of the things we follow. I showed you our stakes in the ground. If you would like to follow those, we'll give you this offer for the next 3 quarters. You can see our trends report. We talk about everything from construction, manufacturing, stock market. We have a whole module there. So I would encourage you, if you want to keep up with us in the near term. I know it's a scary time to be delivering this presentation and then leaving, because I'm saying we're at the inflection point, get ready, and then there's no follow through. We will absolutely see the evidence that we'll see the turn in 90 days. So I encourage you to take advantage of this offer, because this will bring you through that low point. This will bring you through the inflection point. So I know we have a few minutes, and I'll stop here, and I would love to take any questions. Oh, sorry.
David, we have one from the people watching virtually. Dennis O'Shea is asking, what are you expecting to happen in the China economy?
Oh, China. Good question. So China actually had the first real recession on record. I mean, COVID, it struck there first. It struck earliest, hardest, heaviest. I mean, just their numbers, we've never seen anything like that on record in China. So excuse me. So they've since bounced back. That's the good news. I mean, we're even seeing the green shoots in the US where it took a lot longer to see that feed through. So China is a great example of how quickly a country can bounce back. Clearly, the US is not China. There is very fundamental social differences. I wish I had the chart. I don't have it queued up. But the bounce back in China was so severe. We will see growth in China, but the rate of growth in China is much lower than it has been in the past decade, 20 years. So keep in mind, growth in China is full steam ahead, but not that double-digit growth that they saw maybe a decade ago. Thanks for that question.
David Waddell. So, sorry, just definition of terms. Your forecast right now is not incorporating a second stimulus, correct?
That is correct. If we get a second stimulus, that could be an upside risk. Maybe that makes the recovery more robust. Timing-wise, we're almost just out of time. I'm talking about that recovery very imminently, so I don't expect that it would pull it forward, but yes, I do expect a second stimulus would make it more robust. However, we get those unintended consequences, right, of that increased debt, increased borrowing. That's only making it worse down the road. Thank you.
Okay.
Great.
As we get closer to 2030,
Yeah.
what are some of the first dominoes that fall that we say, uh-oh, it's about to hit the fan? And then, how are we going to deal with our debt? Are we going to monetize it, or are we going to default on it?
That is the question.
What do you project happening with interest rates through that? And then finally, will we retain the reserve capital of the world as we go through that?
Ooh, those are all the hard-hitting questions. I love it. All right, let me make sure I get all of them, and correct me if I miss one. The first one, what dominoes fall? I mentioned that demographics are worse elsewhere in the world. I will look to Germany first. We'll probably see some pinches there before we really, really feel them here. Obviously, Japan, I mean, I hate to call it the canary in the coal mine because it's been for so long and we still aren't paying attention. So look elsewhere in the world for the demographics to really become appalling to a point that we can't ignore, then it will clearly follow within just a couple years in the US. But watch the debt metrics. I mean, we saw the debt per capita. Our national debt is above GDP. If we put everything we produce in this country in a year to the national debt, we still couldn't pay it down. That, for a lot of folks was a concerning level, and we've just broken through that in COVID. So I hate to say that, something like the debt to GDP metrics even matter because we haven't hit any concerning level. But watch those metrics, and I think you'll get a sense when it looks like impending doom. Next question, how do we get out of that debt? That really is the issue. I would call that more of a political decision, so I don't think I'm entitled to guess what a politician would do. I really don't want to be in that position, to be honest with you. I can't get in their heads, and I really don't want to be in their heads. So maybe we monetize the debt, maybe we just outright default. Whatever we do, there's no good option for the economy. None of those are, we'll just monetize the debt, it's fine, we'll just avoid a recession or depression. That's really not an option in any of those scenarios. So even if we do maybe the least worst one or come up with some new creative solution, I just don't see how it avoids that depression scenario. So yes, there are options, none of them good. You had what was interest rates? Yes, so interest rates are bound to get higher, obviously. So the US is essentially the reserve currency. We think about US government debt as risk-free, and I'm telling you here that it is the problem. It is the reason we're in for this depression. It won't be risk-free at that time. I do think it will still be traded, and clearly the reserve currency is, there's no other obvious solution for that. So maybe we initially get that flight to safety into US dollar. That could maybe make us think things are okay, but I don't expect that trend to persist beyond the time that this gets obvious. So again, I'll list those same three countries: Canada, Switzerland, Australia. They're going to be some relative safe havens. Their government debt is going to be one of the best places you can be as we ride that roller coaster downward. So I don't think they'll reach reserve currency level, but I think for individual portfolios, that could be a very beneficial place to kind of ride out that downside. Did I hit them all? Awesome. Thank you.
Hello, this is Angela Evans. Thanks for coming today. I really took a lot out of this. I wish I had my computer because I'm not used to writing all these notes, or if I had a note taker, it would have been better, but thank you.
Thank you.
Clearly, companies during this recession or during this time, you talked about online retailers having the greatest measure of gain. And obviously, a lot of brick and mortars pivoted, started putting all their resources and investments into getting their companies online during this.
Yes.
And they've really seen the impact positively. As we are analyzing our investment opportunities going forward for these types of retailers who have both brick and mortar and online sales, what indicators do you have that might help us predict where the balance of that will be? Will it level out? Will online sales go down, and will people be getting out? Whether it's Walmart or an entire industry, like I represent beverage alcohol sales, people
so
are
you're
not going to
having fun
stop
right now.
drinking.
Yes.
But they are going to either buy it online or go to a store, and I'm not sure which one they're going to do.
Okay.
Or hopefully in a restaurant sooner or later. But
Yeah.
what do you think overall about the online sales versus brick and mortar?
So I don't think online sales are tapped out yet. I think we're still riding that trend. We have some indicators that I'm happy to connect with you afterwards on what exactly I would be following, but we follow a lot of e-commerce trends. I just can't believe that trend is exhausted yet. It still is in phase B accelerating growth. So, and even for beverage online, I really think the pandemic again has accelerated these trends that we've seen. Pre-pandemic, I was shocked to learn this, that in, I think it was 2019, 10% of all mattresses bought were purchased online. That blew my mind. I want to go to a mattress store and sit on it, right, and bounce and feel the everything. And how do I just click a button and have a mattress show up at my door? Car sales are turning online. So there are huge opportunities there. And really what opened my eyes during the pandemic is I had a conversation with one of my clients, and they are like a services firm. So they go on site, they need to be measuring this equipment, measuring spaces, having engineers, crunch the numbers and calculate what things they're putting in this facility. And they couldn't do that during the pandemic. They were locked out of these facilities, shut down, couldn't get on a plane. And they actually came up with these creative solutions that they don't need to put their engineer on a plane to, take 2 days, fly out to the customer, measure the site. They just have a little laser thing, and they, click and measure the space and take a scan, a 3D scan, and they have all the information there. Someone can sit in the office, maybe do 3 of those a day, rather than flying out, meeting the customer, taking all that time, taking all that cost. So they found a new creative solution to, kind of take their existing model, and I don't think they're ever sending their engineers on the road anymore because they don't have to. So those are the creative solutions that I'm talking about. Maybe during the pandemic you realized that you can do something over the phone that you had to do in person. That's going to cut costs for a lot of businesses, and I hope we don't go back to that full normal because there are efficiency gains to be made. I had another client, they do roofing materials. They developed this product that you can take, I think it's 3 pictures of a house, and as long as you have a measuring stick, it will calculate how many square you need for your shingle. And that, to me, you don't need someone on site. You just, put your pictures into the website, into the portal, and how easy is it then to just click your color and click purchase. You don't need someone on the phone doing those, that real human element, that real labor intensive. And if that technology can exist, anything can be online. So I think there are major efficiency gains. I don't think this is a net negative. I think, again, we creative Americans, we can make this a positive. So I hope you're finding those opportunities. I know beverage is a little regulatory and what you can sell and can't. Yeah. But hey, good opportunity, good sector to be in, good times and bad. We always keep drinking. That's a great sector. Thank you so much for the question. I think we have one online.
Yes, this
Great.
is from David Trainer. What's driving the onshoring of production, especially technology and also security concerns?
I'm not sure exactly what he means by security concerns. Maybe you can follow up. But really the big thing driving the onshoring, a lot of it is just the opportunities to produce in America. We actually, believe it or not, have a lot of fundamental drivers that make this a good place to manufacture. Things like natural gas, our cost of just pure electricity in this country for a manufacturing plant is half the level that it would be in Europe, and it's actually 1/3 the level that it would be in Asia. So we do have some natural advantages, clearly, skilled talent to work there. And as I mentioned earlier, the kind of production supply chain certainty that if you just have to go down the road to get your products, it's a lot easier than putting it on the boat and hoping China doesn't have a new virus that lock down borders, new tariffs, things like that. So some of it is just that certainty in supply chain. But I will be honest, there are a lot of natural reasons, like energy costs, like our consumer base being close by, transportation costs, things like that, that are really driving this trend even more than just the pandemic concerns.
His follow-up was, are
Yeah.
security concerns driving the onshoring? And I think
Okay, perfect. Thank you for that question.
lots of note-taking. Yes, Klaus, coming.
Early in your presentation, you talked about the consumer.
Yes.
And disposable income is up, household savings are actually up.
Yes.
But how about the flip side, household debt? Student mortgage, credit card. Isn't the household balance sheet, hasn't the household balance sheet worsened over time?
Yes, so debt is up as well, not just incomes. But during the pandemic, I would say we haven't seen really the slate of borrowing. Because interest rates have been low for so long, we saw a lot of people, refinance their house, take on additional debt. We see it from a corporate point of view too as well. I mean, money's cheap right now. If you are looking to invest in new technology, maybe it makes your system more efficient, now is absolutely the time to do that. Money is cheap, and if you can have that in place, have your people trained up now when you have that downtime, what a great way to hit the ground running in 2021, have everyone operating at full efficiency, even better efficiency than you had, maybe a year ago. Maybe this is the time to be buying a new company. We're seeing a lot of M&A activity because, again, money's cheap. Valuations are down as, we're in a recession, right? And so there are great opportunities there. So yes, borrowings are up. I'm not really as concerned about the pure level of borrowing as I am about things like default rates and delinquencies. So from a consumer point of view, mortgage delinquencies are fine. We are well below our 10-year average, really coasting. I don't know the exact number off the top of my head, but all of the trends are for very, very reasonable delinquencies in mortgages. We worked through that bad debt back in the Great Recession. We're in good shape now. Auto loans starting to creep back up. We're a little concerned that there are some of those subprime-y flavor of loans out there. Again, mid-single-digit delinquency rates, nothing too concerning, but right around the 10-year average. So that's something we're watching. The big one, though, for delinquencies is student debt, and that is around 11% right now, which that's a dollar value basis, so 1 out of every $10 of student debt is in some form of delinquency. That's a huge, huge number. I think there are fundamental reasons for that. Maybe there will be forgiveness, or people kind of worry about, should I pay it? Do I have to pay it? Overall, that number, that 11% delinquency rate, has been very steady for at least more than 5 years now. So it's not rising, it's not getting worse, but at the same time, it's not getting better. We're watching that one very closely. We're hopeful that with low unemployment, these former students at least have jobs now. So maybe they'll have a ability to pay it down in the future. But I do agree with you, that's a major debt source right now, and we're watching that closely. Concerned that maybe student debt is delaying those typical consumer behaviors that you go get married, buy a house, have kids, as previous generations have. So definitely something to watch going forward, but not unduly concerned. Thanks for that question.
Here is one from Ken Thomas. What industry should be positioned to do well in the next Great Depression?
I can list a couple, and they're very, very specific, but you'll see these in the book if you read Prosperity in the Age of Decline. The top two are security, whether that's physical security, maybe it's online, digital security, preventing ransomware and that type of thing, break-ins. People just like to protect what they have, especially during down times when you feel like there might be more threats. Another one is just kind of, and again, this is a vague category, but that consumer experience. We don't like to buy things anymore. We like to buy experiences. And kind of a corollary to that is that people my age, we don't have kids. We have fur babies. And so we are spending so much money on our pets that the pet sector overall is looking to be, throughout the 2020s into 2030s, really one of the better growth opportunities. We're buying organic, natural, whatever it is, pet food. So those are, again, very, very specific niche. I don't expect everyone could potentially pivot into them, but if you just had a blank slate and were buying a company, those are a few of the places I would really target.
All right, hey, time for one more question from in-house here. Anybody got one more? Okay, well, hey, thank you very much, everybody.
Great.
Give Lauren a big hand for us.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for coming in, and thank you for the presentation. And once again, thank you for everybody that came out. Thank you for everybody that was watching online. If you have any additional questions, I think Lauren offered to hang out for just a few minutes, have a little bit more coffee. So feel free to come up and say thank you. And once again, we got the Christmas party, holiday party in December. We've got sales training, sales leadership in January, and then we've got the International Man of Memory in February. So you think I could remember that, right? Anyway, so thank you very much for coming. Thank you very much for coming out. And once again, please, as you're exiting, wear your masks and hang out. Thanks. Bye.